Brad Hotnick says that On3 updated their rankings yesterday and Bowles went way down. Yeah, I never know quite what to make about that. I don't. I know there's been some chatter as of late about Arch Manning and, his status as the number one overall recruit. I mean, there is a cynical part of me that believes that people talk about like the Bama bump and things like that. Maybe that exists. There are a lot of people who talk about the Georgia bump. Any fan base that has a big subscription following to one of these big websites, it's sort of thought, well, the web service will serve that audience by giving players a high ranking. And that's one of the things that the folks that work at these websites, I have a lot of friends that work at these places, but or at least people that I'm certainly friendly with. But that's a very hot topic for them, as you might imagine. That's a very touchy subject. I don't even know if that's true or not, but here's what I do know is true. The thing that I think I see more than anything else is that if there's any kind of reason to be cynical when it comes to recruiting rankings, I don't think about it so much in terms of Bama bump or Georgia bump or whatever else bump. I think about it as sort of an uncommitted player bump, that as you move through the cycle, there's just a natural value towards uncommitted players, that there's just money to be made from a uncommitted player being ranked very high, whereas a committed player, hey, sort of in the barn. I mean, Georgia fans themselves are as guilty as this as anybody. You kind of move on from a player once he's committed. You start thinking about uncommitted players. So therefore, if you're in the business of hyping recruits, it sort of makes business sense to hype uncommitted players. Now, listen, that's just sort of the cynical side of me. I'm not telling you that's exactly the way that things go down, but it always seems like there's a lot of value to being an uncommitted player when it comes to the recruiting rankings overall. And I have not saying that's got anything to do with Troy Bowles. Honestly, I think that rating players is a very hard job. That's not a job I'd want to do for $1 million. It's just not. I'm not a scout anyway. But even if I was, that's not the kind of job I'd want to do. So I think it's a pretty thankless job. We all enjoy reading these recruiting ratings and looking at who's rated where. It's content that most of us, I think, kind of enjoy. It is by far not content I'd want to produce, though. I will say that. Hemingway says, I saw a prediction this morning, and won't say where, that Bama goes undefeated regular season. Georgia goes 7-1 in the SEC. Given Bama's struggles last year and the loss of two essential receivers, this boggles my mind. I think that's actually a pretty good point. I don't know that either team loses a regular season game. If I had to guess, maybe neither does. But I don't have a problem if, Hemingway, you're suggesting you think Alabama's more likely to lose in the regular season than Georgia is. I don't have a problem with that take at all. I think that's actually a really good take. If that's your opinion, if that's the sort of position you want to espouse, I think it's a pretty good take. Ohio Dog checks in to say, I think I am more hurt by the legacy factor with Haynes than the talent. You can find talented backs pretty much anywhere, but the kid has to carve his own path, so all love to him. And, yeah, I mean, I think Ohio Dog's kind of like me on this. I don't get mad about a lot of this kind of stuff. I don't take really anything personally. If Ron Haynes is here right now, I'd still be glad to see him. And Justice Haynes, I'm looking forward to watching him play this fall. Hopefully we get a chance to do a couple of Buford games on television. I'm kind of excited about that, the same way I would be if he was, going to Georgia. I don't take a lot of these kinds of things personally, but I am a Georgia fan. I don't apologize for being a fan. I don't apologize for being happy when a player chooses UGA, being disappointed when that player chooses somewhere else. That's kind of the nature of it. And there is a certain appreciation for history if you've been around for a little while. I mean, I'm old enough that I was actually at the Hobnail boot game. I was there in October of 2001, there that day. So that's a special memory for me. And I agree with Ohio Dog that the worst part of Justice Haynes choosing Alabama for now is the fact that I do think it changes the Hobnail boot legacy a little bit. I was joking with somebody yesterday. I'm not quite so sure you can have that video in the pregame montage that airs when the Battle Hymn is playing before the games here this season. I sort of feel like you may need to take a break on that for right now, and it's one of the most sort of storied pieces of video this program has, at least in recent memory. But for the very near future, maybe you got to take a break with that for a minute, I think maybe anyway. So I totally agree with that. Now, I also hold out a little bit of a thought related to this, is some of the weirdest commitment decisions we've seen have ended up being commitment decisions that didn't really last, whether it be, DJ Daniel briefly to South Carolina or Monty Rice briefly to LSU. Sometimes when a commitment decision Adam Anderson, did he decommit from Georgia on G-Day? No, he committed LSU on G-Day. Like, some of the weird stuff that happens ends up being so weird it just doesn't last. So maybe this is an example of that. I think it's a much harder task to wrestle away a player from Bama than it is from other schools that I've mentioned. This is a little bit different kind of thing. But, I guess I'm not quite ready to sort of raise the white flag on that necessarily. But I don't mind telling you, I was disappointed when it went down. This is a partisan show, and I was disappointed when that went down. Are we on the other platforms now? So good morning to everybody on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and Twitch. Hello to all of you, and happy to have you as a part of the program today. Let's do like one or two more quick comments, and we will get ready to get going. Big Daddy, very happy with the Troy Bowles film that he saw from Jeff Sintel. He says he's another Dick Butkus. Big Daddy says this is a longtime Chicago Bears fan. That's kind of cool to see. Cam Hasty says taking the hobnail boot from the video montage kind of reads as sour grapes to me. Maybe that's the case. Maybe you're right, Cam. Maybe you're right about that, but it was the first thought that popped in my head, but maybe I am just being a sore loser on that. Charles Womack says UGA has a really good running back room and has shown the ability to continue to attract top running backs. Yeah, I mean, obviously Dale McGee has done a lot to earn the trust of UGA fans. I would certainly understand that. Now, I still stand beside what I said yesterday, which is that very quietly, I do think this is a Georgia running back situation this year that both has an opportunity to add value to the Georgia offense compared to what happened last year and kind of needs to. I mean, Georgia's been good but not great, I would say, running the football the last couple of years. And to me, not getting Justice Haynes is kind of a reminder that, hey, there's room for this group to do better. There's room for more of those 10 and 20-yard style runs, because if you're going to really kind of get what was it? We did a topic back during the offseason about, hey, could Georgia average 7 yards per carry? And I was actually surprised at how few teams, I don't think any team in the country averaged 7 yards per carry last season. Could Georgia get to that mark here this year? And then the truth is, if you want to get there, you just got to have more sort of 10 and 20-plus yard runs to kind of raise up your average there a little bit. Georgia just didn't have as many of those and has not had as many of those here in recent seasons. Jerome Clark says that I don't mention Andrew Paul enough when I talk about the upcoming Georgia running backs. That may very well be the case. I mean, we talk about Branson Robinson all the time. Maybe we don't talk enough about Andrew Paul. I'll own that. There's a very good chance that's true. Diedrich Frazier says I could see Georgia hitting the transfer portal next year for running back. If it needs to, it certainly will. I don't think they would hesitate to do that, because that may be, and smarter football people than me could weigh in on this, but that may be one of those positions where it's just a little bit easier to plug and play. It's just a little bit easier. Now you say, well, but what about blitz pickup and things like that? That's where it maybe gets complicated. But you could maybe assume that it's just a little bit easier to have a running back translate into your system than maybe some other positions, and we'll see how that plays out for Alabama right now. Obviously, they've got a lot riding on Jahmyr Gibbs transferring in from Georgia Tech. That's a big, big deal for the Crimson Tide here this season. We'll do some more comments here at the end. We got to get going. It's 10:05. All right, so here's what we got today. A little bit on SEC Media Days from yesterday, a little bit on the terrific Year of the Dog documentary that was on the SEC Network last night, commitment watch possibly for Jamal Jarrett, the 4-star defensive lineman. I interacted with Greg Sankey yesterday, the SEC commissioner. We'll talk about that. Connor Riley in the College Football Hall of Fame right now. I'll be there later on today, but we'll catch up with Connor on some of the stuff ongoing with Alabama here at the moment, and what is next for Georgia at the running back spot. So we'll do a lot of that kind of stuff here over the course of our time together. I think it's going to be a really fun show, and we're happy to have you with us for it, as the season is now just right around the corner. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So SEC Media Days began yesterday, and the Georgia Bulldogs obviously get their turn at bat on Wednesday, but just because the Dogs were not there, it didn't stop me from having a chance to ask another SEC coach about his feelings about UGA, a guy that, unfortunately, if you're him, has to compete with the reigning national champions in his own division. That's Missouri coach Eli Drinkwitz. I think that Drinkwitz is a pretty interesting figure all the way around, just because certainly he has a little bit different look than a lot of the other SEC coaches. That's been well documented. He's one of the few guys in college football in general that actually didn't play college football, so that's a little bit different when it comes to Drinkwitz there as well. This is just kind of a different figure all the way around, but when he speaks, he's, I think, sometimes pretty interesting. So one of the questions I had a chance to ask Drinkwitz yesterday, you come into the SEC, you're going to have a challenge, and then all of a sudden now you got in your division a team like Georgia that won the national championship. That's me giving a summary of the question. Let me just let you hear me asking Drinkwitz that question. It sets us up for a fun conversation. Here is Drink on UGA. When you entered the SEC, you knew it was going to be a big challenge, and since you've been here, Georgia, a team that you play every year in your division, has emerged as a national champion. What does that mean to you? What do you think about having the national champions in your division? What's the challenge of that like for you?
I mean, that's ultimately that's what you're trying to play for every year is the championship, and so you have an opportunity to measure yourself against the best. You know what it's going to take, and you also know if you can win your division, then you have an opportunity to play for the championship. That's why for us, our goal is to win the SEC East, because we know that if you do that, the rest of the season's goals will take care of themselves.
I was listening to Drinkwitz speaking there, and the rest of the press conference. I had a chance to be in with him yesterday, and I was thinking about some of that kind of stuff and how different the SEC East is right now because of the rise of Georgia, and how in some respects, I think that luck plays a little bit of a role in almost anything that happens in anyone's life. Good luck, bad luck, everything else in between. Part of any one story involves a certain measure of luck, and for as good a coach as Kirby Smart has been, and as successful as he's proven to be in his, thought process and his commitment to details and all the effort that he puts into it certainly helps explain the success. He also benefited from at least one stroke of luck when he first took this job at Georgia in 2016, in that there really wasn't a team like Georgia in the SEC East at that time. The two, you look at the Smart's first year, the year before that, and the two previous years before he got here, the teams that had won the SEC East had been Missouri a couple of times and Florida a couple of times, but nowhere near the same kind of Florida that had been led by Urban Meyer or Steve Spurrier. There just wasn't a big behemoth in the SEC East when Kirby Smart took this job in 2016. And so it made, I think, the task of building Georgia into a winner very quickly. I think that task was made easier by the fact that you didn't have this firmly established power that you're trying to work against or work around or having to deal with really in any way. And so you saw Georgia start to collect success very quickly. Won the division for the first time in 2017, not just winning those games, but winning them all by like 2 touchdowns or more, and kind of keeping a similar pattern in place every year since then. And now, if you're Eli Drinkwitz, who's been at Missouri since 2020, or other SEC East coaches who I'm sure will be speaking about Georgia here some this week, all of a sudden you're Drinkwitz and you think, winning the division should be a possibility for my program because it's done it a couple times before. But all of a sudden, I'm trying to do this in a division that includes UGA. And by the way, Kirby Smart's in his mid-40s. Kirby Smart's as confident as he's ever been. I mean, can you imagine what it must be like to be one of these coaches in the SEC East, knowing that Georgia's dealing with an unimaginable level of success, and they might only just be getting started? And kind of further that conversation a little bit more, I thought last night was great on television. Watching the Year of the Dog documentary the SEC Network did, I think one of the things that made it so cool was it sort of feels like this is the kind of thing we get in the NFL all the time. I happen not to like the NFL anywhere near as much as I like college football. Not to say I don't like it at all. It's just a secondary sport for me in comparison to the sport that I love more than anything else, which is college football. But because the NFL media ecosystem is so big, you get NFL films and these style of documentaries all the time. Even week to week, you get a lot of this. You ever watch like Inside the NFL and stuff like that? You get a good bit of kind of behind-the-scenes footage of what's happening in the NFL. I don't know that you get a lot of that in college football. There is just a very iron fist that controls most of the media stuff related to college football. But last night, we got some of that with Georgia on the way to its national championship season on the Year of the Dog. Now, there was a lot of this stuff that was really cool from this documentary. Some of it I don't know that perfectly translates to the podcast, things like that, some really cool footage and whatnot. But in light of what Eli Drinkwitz was just saying right there, the Missouri coach saying, hey, our goal is to win the East. And when you look at Georgia, we want to do what they're doing. Well, my gosh, good luck with that, because I think what we saw behind the scenes and some of the footage on display on the SEC network last night is a Georgia coach in Kirby Smart who's just quite confident and sort of assured, comfortable in his own skin. And maybe no moment in last night's documentary better illustrated that than some of the pregame footage before the SEC championship game. Now, what's ironic about this, and you already have probably filled in the gaps on this in your own mind, which is that's the single worst moment of the season for Georgia. They got blasted by Alabama in the SEC championship. But in terms of rewatching all this last night, a couple of those pregame moments from Smart before that game were actually some of the coolest things in this entire hour-long show. And we'll play a little audio from this, and we'll set it up for you. You're going to see you're going to hear an interaction that Kirby Smart had with his son. Is Andrew, is that his name? With his son, where the son's asking Kirby, "Hey, are you nervous?" He asked him that a couple of times, and that's kind of cool. And then there's just kind of a jump cut to Kirby talking to George Pickens, and then kind of a jump cut to Kirby talking to Adonai Mitchell, another wide receiver. And in light of a guy like Eli Drinkwitz saying, hey, our goal is to win the SEC East. Our goal is to be doing what Georgia's doing. Well, a very confident Kirby Smart seems to be suggesting on last night's Year of the Dog documentary they don't plan on relinquishing their stranglehold on the SEC East anytime soon. This is good stuff from Kirby from last night, Year of the Dog.
Andrew!
Nervous?
Love you, boy.
Love you too.
Hey, no matter what happens, you my son, you know that?
Yeah.
Love you, boy.
You nervous?
Nah. Hey, be patient today because you know you're not in everything. So you can't get frustrated when you're not in, okay? No frustration. You know what I mean? You're going to build to a crescendo, and it may not be today. Because no matter what happens, we got another shot.
Yeah.
And you may get 10 catches, you may get 1, you may get 0, but help everybody else. You look good. You're going to get a chance to play in here 4 times, maybe 3 times. So relax and have fun. Next time you come back, you'll be the lead dog. You got nothing to be nervous about.
So let me kind of give you a quick aside for a moment. I want to get back to the topic at hand. First of all, let's just stop and bask for a minute. Like, how good is that? Like, how good is that open mic on Kirby before that game? You hear his son ask him twice, are you nervous? Are you nervous? That's a young man in that particular situation who seems to want some comfort from his daddy, and Kirby just gives it to him, man. That's a good – in addition to being a good coach, he's got time to be a good dad before the game takes place. There's something just really kind of nice about that. And the way in which, he calmed some potential nerves from George Pickens, or in Pickens' case, maybe a little bit of just, Pickens is a high energy type guy. Maybe he's trying to kind of turn that energy down a little bit to make sure he's kind of at the right place he needs to be before that game. And then with A.D. Mitchell, hey, and Kirby doesn't say this in sort of a boastful, braggadocious way. I think he's trying to keep A.D. Mitchell from pressing too hard in any one game, but saying, you're going to play in this game 4 times or 3 times, assuming he may go to the NFL after his junior season. You're going to play in this game every year of your career, so don't go out there and try to do too much right now. That's kind of a cool thing to hear from Kirby Smart, but in light of the topic we're also discussing right now, but an SEC East coach saying, hey, Georgia is where we want to be as the coach of the SEC East champs, I guess good luck with that, because based on what you heard last night from Kirby Smart on Year of the Dog, he plans on being in the SEC championship game in each of the next 4 years at least, if not for many more years beyond that. You've seen the T-shirt. We made it years ago, and a lot of folks still wear them. Own the East. The idea that the division was Georgia's for the taking each and every year, not just a one-year thing. Kirby Smart came about as close as one's ever going to come to saying own the East there last night. So I thought that was kind of neat. But to get back to Eli Drinkwitz here for a moment, we know how that story ends for Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs. They don't win that game against Alabama, the audio you were just hearing leading into that SEC title game. But they do come back and get the win in the national championship, something else that Missouri coach Eli Drinkwitz also saw, and something he told me yesterday that honestly he was quite impressed with how Georgia played in those postseason moments down the stretch, including getting that revenge against the Crimson Tide. This more from the Missouri coach on Kirby and the Dogs.
Obviously, Kirby's done a tremendous job of establishing the culture You can see it throughout his program. You can see it in how he recruits. You can see it in how he plays the game. You can see it in how his phases of the game complement each other. You could see it in the fourth quarter as they figured out a way to really outplay Alabama down the stretch in the championship game. And so kudos to him and in that program. And now it's our challenge for us to get to that level.
I just think it's nice if you're a Georgia fan to hear another SEC coach acknowledge the success that UGA has had and the role that Kirby Smart has played in leading Georgia to that success, both in the national championship season and all the years prior to that, leading up to Georgia breaking through in that big way. And I'll kind of finish with this. You know, yesterday when Ole Miss coach Lane Kiffin started his big room press conference, the first question he received was about Alabama. And Kiffin kind of joked about something, I guess, that Kirby Smart's told him behind the scenes, which is, you know, you get to SEC Media Days and you just sort of end up talking about Alabama because that's what so many of the questions from the media end up being about. And it's easy to understand why that would have been true in the past. You know, Alabama's won a lot of national championships and Nick Saban has had an unprecedented level of success. But last year was maybe the start of a little bit of a change as it relates to all that. That all of a sudden Alabama, at least for now, is not the bull of the woods in the SEC. It is the Georgia Bulldogs. And Kirby Smart, at the age that he is, may only just be getting started here. On the video we saw last night on the SEC network, he showed a lot of confidence on his way towards a national championship season. And a lot of coaches like Eli Drinkwitz may have to do a whole lot more talking about Kirby Smart during SEC Media Days for many years into the future. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and we are happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com. We get going there at 9:45, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. Also, 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. All kinds of great stuff going for you on video, podcasts, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. And radio, noon, Athens Sports Radio 960. A lot of ways for you to get in touch with the program and watch us, listen to us, whatever else. We're just happy that you do all of that. And a huge thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making it all possible. You know, ESOG, the one you turn to for your foundation, your waterproofing issues. And that's really important when it comes to this morning when I woke up, there was some rain. There was a lot of rain in downtown Atlanta for the College Football Hall of Fame already today there as well. And for some of you, when that rain comes in, it leads to a lot of issues because it comes in where it's not supposed to be, in your garage, your crawl space, down your basement. It's the kind of thing you know you need to do something about. Well, Engineered Solutions of Georgia is the source you turn to when you need to do something about it. They got an entire team of engineers on staff ready to go to work for you. There is nobody else in the market that's able to say they've got those kinds of resources for you. That's what ESOG is all about. Also, foundation issues there as well. You see those cracks in your walls. You see all of that. You know that could be the sign of a more substantial issue. All the more reason to put a solutions-based company like Engineered Solutions of Georgia to work for you. They're also proud partners of UGA. Makes them great to do business with. Longtime friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily there as well. We certainly appreciate your support of those that support us, and they're easy to get in touch with there as well. You can simply give them a call, 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. That'll get you in touch with our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and I hope you will check them out today. And we'll check out Connor Riley here coming up in a moment. We'll do a Kroger Fresh Take with him live from SEC Media Days. I'll be at the College Football Hall of Fame later on this afternoon, kind of catching up with some of the guys who were there then. Connor are there right now, and basically they're all week too, so we'll get a live look from him on that coming up in a moment. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse. Let me remind you that we could have some recruiting news to follow a little bit later on this evening as four-star defensive lineman Jamal Jarrett getting ready to make his announcement tonight, 6:30 p.m. I think it's interesting on this particular graphic, if you're watching on video, you see the decision as the headline, the three different photos of Jarrett showing off the three uniforms of his three finalists. You've got Georgia holding the national championship trophy. You've got UNC holding, kind of a replica of a wrestling championship belt. And honestly, many of you are probably very well aware, I think that's really cool because I like pro wrestling. And so the pro wrestling style belt, I kind of like. I also think it's really funny that in the Auburn photo, and I'm not making fun of Jarrett here, I'm making fun of Auburn. In the Auburn photo, he's not holding anything. Like Auburn doesn't even have fake wrestling belts right now. Like they literally, as a program, have nothing going for them. Georgia got the national championship, also taking center stage in the photo. You can't help but notice that. UNC showing off a little bit of something. I don't even know where the championship belt would have come from, but kind of cool nonetheless. And poor Auburn in the photo, Jarrett just kind of having to hold on to his shoulder pads because Auburn's got no gold to show off right now. I think that's pretty good. I think that's pretty good indeed. So later on this evening, we will get a chance to see where Jarrett's going. Obviously, he has been pitched on being the next Jordan Davis to a place like UGA. Of course, Davis also from the state of North Carolina, Mallard Creek. By the way, great stuff from Davis. Going back to his hometown elementary school this week. We'll probably show you some of that on the show at some point in time this week when we have more time to be able to do that. But the point is that Jarrett makes his decision tonight. As a little bit of a preview for this, I want to give you some of Jarrett going back a couple of weeks ago when he was with Jeff Sintel on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, our recruiting show each week here on DawgNation. Jeff asking him more about the official visit, what Georgia did well, and what Georgia defensive line coach Trey Scott's telling Jamal Jarrett right now about what he could do at UGA. Jarrett gave you some pretty good insight on that. So before we see his commitment decision tonight, let's hear Jarrett in his own words with DawgNation a couple of weeks ago. Here is Jamal Jarrett.
We need a big dude like you to keep the path going that Jordan Davis and them set. So that's pretty much it. His same thing. He's like, you know what you got to do if you want to be great.
Jamal, it sounds like you've had 3 really great official visits so far, but I would like to ask you to compare them. Like, how does Georgia do it differently than Carolina?
Georgia, they really at the top right now. As far as like best official visits, I guess they studied from their recruits that they had in the past, and they just made their officials even better based off what the feedback they got from their players. So, I mean, just the way they presented themselves, like the grand entrance and everything, that really stood out. No schools did that yet. On the 3 I've been on, they had a grand entrance and everything. It was pretty cool.
So when he talks about the grand entrance, what he's talking about there is, and he went on to explain more of this in the interview, that when he arrived at the hotel for the official visit, all like the Georgia assistant coaches were kind of like waiting for him there, almost like a red carpet type deal where they were greeting him as he got out of the vehicle coming into the hotel, like a big grand entrance, a big greeting as he showed up for his official visit. And it's also interesting, much the same way that you think of the Georgia coaches as watching a lot of film to prepare themselves for games. Also going back and, as Jarrett says, talking to other recruits about what worked for their official visit and trying to use that intel as a way of making an official visit for future recruits even better, including for Jamal Jarrett. That's actually a really interesting piece of insight from Jarrett there on all of that. So I think that's incredibly cool. Jamal Jarrett gets ready to make his decision tonight. I would say he's already a popular figure among UGA fans. Of course, in this day and age, you can't count anything as a win until it actually takes place. But Jarrett has certainly earned a lot of love from Georgia fans along the way because he has returned that affection with affection of his own for Georgia. He clearly seems to like Jordan Davis a lot, seems interested in potentially traveling the path that Davis traveled from the Tar Heel State to the University of Georgia into a starring role. We know how important those big interior defensive linemen have been for the Dogs, and maybe tonight Jamal Jarrett stands up and says, I'm ready to be the next one there on that list. We will certainly be watching closely to see. That is Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia here today. Before we're done, I interacted with SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey some yesterday. And I asked Sankey a direct question that I feel like I've heard from a lot from you, which is that in future years, the SEC is going to look a lot different. Is it too different? Are you concerned with how fans might respond to all of this? I asked that question directly to the SEC Commissioner yesterday. We'll let you hear his response to it before we're done on the show today. But for now, everything with recruiting, Jamal Jarrett, what's next at running back, also what's happening right now at SEC Media Days. Let's cover it all with Kroger's, what do we call it? So Kroger Fresh Day with Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Connor Riley here right now. Kroger Fresh Take with him here on DawgNation Daily here today. SEC Media Days, of course, happening as we speak. We'll look forward to getting more from Connor on that in just a moment. Connor, before we get there, though, let me bring you in on what we were just discussing, the Jamal Jarrett decision going down tonight. This is a recruit that I think has become popular with UGA fans. This is a position of need, I would say, for Georgia, that next space-eating interior defensive lineman. It's also a cool coincidence that he hails from the same state that Jordan Davis once came from. You're also on guard this day and age because it seems like anything can happen right before a decision. What do you make of the Jamal Jarrett announcement slated to take place on Tuesday night?
Haynes' announcement from this weekend showed you that sort of anything can happen, but I think Georgia feels very good about where they are in his recruitment. If you remember back to when Jamal Jarrett took his official visit to Georgia, Jordan Davis was in town. I don't think that was a coincidence. I think in this Georgia defense, there is an incredible value of having just a true space-eating, zero-technique nose guard, and that is exactly what Jamal Jarrett is. 6'6", 350 pounds, impressive size and speed get-off for him. I think he's a guy who, seeing what Georgia did with Jordan Davis, is the perfect blueprint to recruit a guy like Jamal Jarrett. You hear Kirby Smart mention it before. The best thing about having a Jordan Davis is that it makes it easier to go out and recruit the next Jordan Davis. And you don't necessarily want to put that on a 17-year-old, but those are the vibes that Jamal Jarrett gives off as he makes his decision tonight between Georgia, North Carolina, and Auburn.
Should certainly be fun to see. What's a little less fun, as you mentioned a moment ago, is what goes down with Justice Haynes there on Sunday. By now, we've had our take on this. You've written about it. I've talked about it plenty here. But as far as like turning the page goes, you know, people bring up the name Richard Young. That's another elite running back that up to this point in time is uncommitted. You start mentioning sort of the running back names kind of down the list. The possibility that maybe Georgia might wait for transfer portal for next season if it needs someone. What do you think the immediate aftermath of Justice Haynes choosing Alabama on Sunday is? And by the way, Georgia continuing to recruit Haynes hard is also an acceptable answer here too. What comes next at the running back position for the Dogs?
Yeah, I mean, they have to take at least one high school running back from this ranks just because I think there's a very real possibility that Kenny McIntosh and Kevin move on to the NFL after this year. And you can maybe, you know, get one transfer running back if the right player becomes available. But let's point out as well, Georgia didn't take any transfers this past year. So to expect them to sort of rate and hope that the guy that they want at that running back position becomes available via the transfer portal, it just doesn't fit with how Georgia has operated and used the transfer portal. You know, they're probably a little bit behind in terms of Richard Young, and now maybe Justice Haynes going to Alabama maybe helps them and makes them a little bit more desperate for a player like Young's talents. I know Oregon is also very involved in that recruitment there as well. I expect Georgia to work hard to try and flip some possibly other committed running backs out there. I know Roderick Robinson out of California, a UCLA commit, is a guy that Georgia had sort of taken a look at, kicked the tires on because, you know, I think they had always wanted to take two running backs in this 2023 recruiting cycle, and I think all of us had Justice Haynes pretty much written in pen, and now with him going to Alabama, and I expect him to ultimately end up at Alabama, barring some unforeseen change. Georgia is certainly behind the eight ball when it comes to running back recruiting in this class, and I think they absolutely have to take at least one high school running back from this recruiting class.
I feel like I'm kind of on an island about something as it relates to this topic, at least somewhat connected, which is that for folks who want to see offensive improvement for Georgia in this upcoming season, as good as the offense was a year ago, people think there's still a chance for another step forward in year 3 under Todd Monken. And I feel like a lot of people zero in on passing game because that's what seems to be working so well for so many other programs, just being dynamic with the quarterback, with the wide receivers, things like that. The honest truth, though, Connor, is if I were to see Georgia take a huge step forward offensively, I think the real opportunity for a value add is at the running back spot with the running game in particular. And I've talked about this plenty over the course of this offseason, and I feel like it's kind of needed to be restated in light of losing Justice Haynes, that in terms of what Georgia once was, not just with Nick Chubb and Sony Michel, but what it was in 2018 with DeAndre Swift and Elijah Holyfield. The last 3 years for Georgia running the football have not really been at that level. Part of that is because they do throw the ball more and throw the ball better than they used to, but that doesn't completely explain it all. Connor, I look at a Georgia rushing attack on the field this season that honestly I think needs to be a little better than it has been, even better than it was last year in a season that ultimately resulted in the Dogs winning a national championship.
Yeah, and you mentioned that national championship. Think back to that game. That 67-yard run by James Cook totally swung, I think, the momentum in that game, set up Georgia's first touchdown. you're not going to repeat 67-yard runs a whole lot, but even, Cook getting to that point and ripping off, say, a 15 to 20-yard run. We saw Zamir White sort of have success with that in the second half of that game, but it's not something we saw nearly enough last season. I think you pointed this stat out to me. I think Georgia had 147 passing plays of 10-plus yards last season, only 88 rushes of 10-plus yards. Those numbers have to improve, and specifically with the rushing numbers, because you need to sort of have that explosive running game just to make it easy. And I think you and I have talked about this. You can look back to this rushing offense has not been the same since Sam Pittman left. And so I'll be really interested in this offensive line this year. I think pegged to be the best offensive line since that 2019 unit, Sam Pittman's last year at the University of Georgia. And so I think if the offensive line lives up to that potential, specifically the guard position, because their guards, which is not good enough last year, in my opinion, to be that sort of dominant offense that you want to see from a rushing standpoint. If that offensive line improves, I believe in the talent in the running back room. But at the same point in time, Kenny McIntosh and Kendall don't have to be the guys that consistently create those 10 to 20-yard runs, because that's how you score easily. You're not going to rip off a 60, 70-yard run every play, because that either relies on a true NFL game breaker or, as you pointed out before, a safety falling down. Those 10 to 20-yard runs, I do believe, can be manufactured, and Georgia needs to do a better job of doing that this season.
We've basically been in this box getting ready for the show the entire time that SEC Media Days has been ongoing today, so I've heard very little of what Nick Saban has had to say, or Bryce Young, or any of the other folks who've been there thus far, although we are seeing some video of Saban arriving at the College Ball Hall of Fame earlier this morning, if you're watching on video right now. What has come out, if anything, from today? Anything standing out from you from the national runner-ups appearance at SEC Media Days?
Yeah, I got to spend some time with Bryce Young, hear what he had to say. I had some nice things to say about Jermaine Burton. Mentioned that Burton has brought up the national championship game and how that turned out for Alabama, given that he was on the Georgia side. Young has mentioned that game was a motivator for him, and as he looks to sort of, again, the Heisman is nice for him, NIL is nice for him. He wants to win a national title. As far as what Nick Saban had to say, very conveniently threw out that Alabama players made $3 million in NIL last year. At the end there, he was sort of asked to talk about losing to assistant coaches Jimbo Fisher, Kirby Smart a year ago. Didn't mention Smart or Fisher by name, but then brought up Steve Sarkisian unprompted and praised Sarkisian certainly more than he did of Kirby Smart there. So I thought that was a little bit interesting. Didn't get a chance to hear from Will Anderson, but we'll have stories coming on that as well. This Alabama team is talented. I think there were a lot of national media types noting how comfortable Saban felt, how at ease felt about the direction of this team. And when you have not just the two best players, in my opinion, in the SEC, but perhaps the two best players in college football in Bryce Young and Will Anderson, I think that certainly helps you out a lot. I'm
seeing a tweet from Josh Pate on the screen here. Saban saying a lot of people are making promises they may not be able to keep when it comes to NIL. Connor, I think that's an interesting statement from Saban, and it goes to something we've talked about plenty of times before, that a lot of these sort of exaggerated financial figures are coming from groups of people that actually haven't raised the money they're offering, to these players. There's all kinds of rumors out there involving Jordan Addison right now, who allegedly might be unhappy with the fact that he ain't getting what he's promised there at USC. What do you make about that next phase of this discussion? Apparently Saban touching on that some here today.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this before. I think as this NIL school sort of gets run out and we sort of get a better grasp and understanding of what this is, I feel like it's going to have a lesser and lesser impact in terms of the college football world. There's just such a newness to it right now that is sort of, catching some people off guard and certainly attracting certain people elsewhere. I've mentioned this on your show before, but you look at, say, a Texas A&M recruiting class right now. Yes, they signed the number one class a year ago. They only have 5 commits at this point in time. And in July, that has been much more active from a recruiting standpoint. There's not that same level of spending, so to speak, when it comes to that A&M class. So as much as I think this NIL, people see the money, they want to go after it, I do think that results are still going to have a very strong sway. And at the end of the day, I think that's ultimately what is going to win out and become a thing in college football once again, to where NIL is a thing that you have to take care of. But it is no longer the number one reason that, say, you go to a school or you transfer to another school.
I want to ask you about Georgia, who's going to be here tomorrow. We'll do that here in a moment. Let me remind folks, it's our Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley right now, live from SEC Media Days. And, of course, he does that with us each and every week. And speaking of Kroger, boy, what a great time right now to go ahead and send a nomination for the child that you know, whether it be your own child or just a child in your life, to be our Kroger 5-star kid. We had a great, very, very fun run with this last year. We have another opportunity to give out some terrific gifts to our Kroger 5-star kids here this year there as well. So your chance to nominate the child that you know, that you're aware of. Doesn't take very long to do this, but you can certainly help tell a great story about one of the children in your life. So go to info@DawgNation.com. That's the email address, info@DawgNation.com, and you can nominate a child that you know, your own child or whoever else, to be one of our Kroger 5-star kids. And starting the week of August 1st, we'll start making those announcements right here on DawgNation Daily. So the time to start making those nominations right now. We'll draw winners at random, 5 of them to be announced the week of August 1st. So send an email to info@DawgNation.com if you want to be honored or have the child that you know be honored as one of our 5-star kids, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. Connor, last thing for you. Tomorrow, Wednesday, that's when the Georgia Bulldogs will take center stage. Stetson Bennett, Nolan Smith, Cedric Von Granger, of course, Kirby Smart. What do you expect to be the hot topics facing Georgia, Kirby, maybe in particular here? What do you expect to be the most interesting stuff to potentially come out of what UGA has to say tomorrow?
I mean, they'll get asked to death about championship hangover. They'll get asked about, replacing a legendary defense. I think Stetson Bennett's going to get a lot of interesting questions about sort of his lack of respect, given he is the defending national championship quarterback and played pretty well, all things considered, last year. And so I think those are going to be the major narratives coming out of tomorrow. I'm interested to hear what Nolan Smith has to say. Obviously, I've been a big fan of his for some time, and I think as much as people want to hear about the hangover from the championship defense, I do think there are still a lot of really, really good players on this defense, Nolan Smith obviously being one of them. And I wonder if some people might be surprised by maybe the confidence that I believe Nolan Smith is going to display tomorrow when discussing Georgia's 2022 defense.
You'll also get a chance to kind of ask some more direct questions in kind of a non-large room setting with Kirby, and some of the injury stuff will probably come up there. Are you on guard at all for any of the injury stories, whether it be like a Brock Bowers or a Smile Mond or anything like that, for any of those maybe lingering a little bit longer than fans expect it to? Because I think for the most part, people are sort of assuming that Georgia's going to be sort of all systems go for the start of summer practices. Is there any injury story that you're on guard for maybe lingering a little longer than maybe fans want it to?
I think Tate Ratledge is the guy I'm most interested in finding out where he is. Obviously, Brock Bowers, because of his proximity and name, is a guy to know there for that. But, Tate was a guy who I think some of us thought he'd be farther along in the spring, and that just proved to not be the case. And so, he had I believe, a Liz Frank surgery, and that's a very significant foot injury, especially for a big guy of his size. He was a guy who started the game against Clemson last year and got hurt on the opening drive. And so, with what we think we need to see out of this offensive line this year, I'm really interested to see what the update is on Tate Ratledge. And I point out this time a year ago, we first found out Darius Jackson had a knee injury that, had surgery on and pretty much prevented him from being the guy we thought he was going to be last year. So that's certainly something to be aware of as we hear from Kirby Smart and company tomorrow.
Connor, good stuff. Look forward to reading you from SEC Media Days today, and obviously a lot of very important information coming out of the UGA appearance there tomorrow, and of course plenty of recruiting stuff in between all that there as well. Hope you have a great day there at the College Football Hall of Fame. I'll see you there a little bit later on, and we'll, of course, talk to you next week here during our Kroger Fresh Take on DawgNation Daily as well.
Yep, have a good one.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I think unfortunately last year, and maybe my memory on this is not as good as it could be, but it seems like there were a lot of injury situations that just kept not getting better. Karis Jackson, Dominic Blaylock, JT Daniels, where, it just seemed like they just kept sort of expecting it to be kind of all behind you, and they just sort of kept lingering there a little bit. Certainly Darnell Washington was probably an example of that. And so I guess there's a part of me that I am curious, and I think Connor kind of zeroes in on a pretty important name there when it comes to Tate Ratledge, because had Ratledge been a starter for Georgia last season as he was projected to be, I honestly think the Georgia offensive line would have really benefited from that. And I think that a unit that ultimately helped Georgia win the national championship with Ratledge would have maybe been even better. I think it probably would have been. And when I think about the best version of the Georgia offensive line here for this upcoming season, there's no doubt that Tate would be in my top 5 there as I consider all of that. So I think Connor is spot on when he kind of zeroes in on a health update on Ratledge being a pretty important thing to ask tomorrow. And Georgia reporters like our own Connor Riley and Mike Griffith will get a chance to do just that. Now, there's also a chance that Kirby maybe legitimately doesn't have all the information he needs to make much of a health evaluation right now. That's certainly possible, but it'd be nice to hear, something about some of those types of guys that were held out during the spring. Maybe we'll get a chance to do that. We'll also talk about some of the other stuff related to SEC Media Days here coming up in a moment. Let me remind you that we are cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. What a cool time to be doing that, and what a great time to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. And there are different kinds of Royal Caribbean cruise ships that you can choose to take a cruise vacation on. And a lot of you know, I like the big ships. I like the Oasis class. These are the ships that have like the big aqua theater in the back and really sort of all of the amenities that you could ever imagine a cruise ship having. And yet, in some cases, for other people, it's sometimes maybe a slightly smaller ship, maybe a slightly more intimate experience might be something you might enjoy. And one of the things I guess I'd never really fully considered, although I was kind of thinking about this the other day, is that there are certain ports of call, more exotic ports, things like that, that in some cases, the really big Oasis class ships, in some cases, they're just so big that, for some of the cooler exotic ports of call, that may not be a ship that can get there quite as easily. So some of the smaller ships in the Royal Caribbean fleet, those are the ships that are kind of sailing there on a more regular basis. It's just another example of a thing I talk about all the time, which is that you can really tailor a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation to suit your needs, whatever your needs happen to be. You want the biggest experience of them all, where the ship itself is kind of part of the destination, part of the fun. You want to go to some cool places that you maybe read about, heard about, never really seen before, truly exotic type ports. There's a Royal Caribbean cruise ship for you that does that there as well. It's one of the reasons why you want to trust a real travel expert to help you when you make your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation choice. Our friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority can do that for you. You can find them online, tcava.com. That's tcava.com. You can also give them a call, 770-952-8300. That's 770-952-8300. Tell them that BA from DawgNation Daily sent you over there, and tell them to help you get set up with a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I think you'll be really glad that you did that. All right, let's talk SEC Media Days from yesterday a little bit. Thought it was interesting with LSU coach Brian Kelly. And look, I don't know how much PR matters. Sometimes it does. Maybe sometimes it doesn't. Obviously, yesterday he knew one of the tasks awaiting him was to kind of find a way to laugh off the error at the beginning of his LSU career when he kind of seemingly got caught faking a Southern accent. Remember the family that he tried to give off, and it just didn't go very well. And yesterday he kind of joked about that, about his accent, and he said whatever he said. To me, there's an aspect of this that in the aftermath of it, I don't quite know that Brian Kelly quite got it right. I sort of feel like by acknowledging the premise of this, and I think you've probably heard me say this before, I think he's only given credence to the fact that he did try to be something that he wasn't, which to me, if I'm an LSU fan, would actually give me some concern. I know this kind of comes across as gaslighting, and it's lying, and that's not a good thing to do, probably. I mean, it's definitely not good to lie. This probably would be counted as a lie. But it's almost like Kelly would have been better served by acting like he has no idea what people are talking about when they address the fake accent thing. Because here's what I can tell you, is that the people who were at the basketball game in Baton Rouge the day that Kelly gave the fake accent heard around the world weren't immediately aware of the controversy. It was only after the video surfaced that people started making a big deal about it, and like everything else, all of this kind of erupts on social media. That if Kelly wanted to pretend like he was completely unaware that this conversation was taking place, he probably had some cover to be able to do just that, but that's not kind of what he chose to do. He sort of seemed to give a little bit of credence to the idea of, hey, I tried this, it didn't work, I got caught being something that I'm not. Boy, good luck trying to handle that type of deal, being at LSU, a place that is truly filled with authentic Southerners, authentic Louisiana type people. Man, you better be careful trying to be anything other than what you naturally are. And apparently Kelly has sort of openly admitted that's maybe what he did. That's kind of weird. The other thing that kind of comes up here is the situation for LSU at quarterback, and this is more on the field. And I've told you before that when you look at the overall roster for LSU, there's still a good bit of talent here. I am completely lost as to what they have at quarterback. I don't think Miles Brennan's very good. I think if he was, he would have already won the LSU starting quarterback job, his injury situation notwithstanding. Same thing for Jaden Daniels, who at the beginning of his career at Arizona State really had the look of maybe being a really pretty special quarterback. He's a pretty good athlete at the position there as well, but kind of never got better over the course of his time there at Arizona State. Now he's transferred to LSU. So I'm actually not quite so sure that either Jaden Daniels or Miles Brennan are very good. I don't think Garrett Nussmeier's probably ready. So you're left to wonder, does LSU have a quarterback at all? We don't know that yet. But if they do, LSU's probably still talented enough to be dangerous. And for a guy like Kelly, for as much as he's kind of rubbed me the wrong way, like a lot of folks have probably felt the way about Kelly throughout his sort of football life, the truth is he has kind of proven to be a pretty good coach. At Notre Dame, they rarely got upset. They never beat teams with superior talent, but they also really never lost very frequently to teams with inferior talent. That's at least some measure of who he is as a coach. And he's going to have some games this year. Think about Florida, for instance, where his coaching couldn't matter. He could coach LSU to a win, but if he has a quarterback, it would certainly make that task a whole lot easier, and that's going to be one of the big mysteries to unfold as the offseason continues and we roll into the start of summer practices. Saw where Lane Kiffin, I spent a little bit of time with Kiffin yesterday in one of the rooms there, and obviously a lot of what Kiffin had to say yesterday was related to the NIL stuff and his belief that college football has now basically moved into a professional sport. He thinks he's so, savvy and candid when he gives these remarks. But the issue I continue to have with a guy like Lane Kiffin basically saying it all comes down to how good your boosters are. It all comes down, to how willing they are to pay your players. Even if we would all acknowledge to a degree that's clearly a huge factor in what's happening right now, no one would deny that's at least some of what's going on here. But if you're saying the entire effort, which is Kiffin's basically said, he basically said this yesterday, that the entirety of your effort in terms of getting a roster together sort of rests with how good your boosters are, then guess what? The program doesn't belong to you. The program belongs to the boosters. I've said this a million times, that whoever signs your paycheck, that's your boss. And what Kiffin's essentially saying is, hey, this program doesn't belong to me as the head coach. It belongs to the boosters who might be willing to pay the players. Or maybe even more problematic than that, it becomes this issue of, I don't have any responsibility for this whatsoever. Kiffin's not a very aggressive recruiter. He's never been very good at recruiting. A lot of offensive coordinators aren't. Kiffin, an example of that there too. But when he kind of puts all of this on transfer portal and NIL, it's almost like, to me, and if I was an Ole Miss fan, you better believe I'd feel this way. It's almost like, to me, Kiffin's not taking enough responsibility for what happens with his program. I am so glad. Listen, people can say Kirby Smart's got a lot to figure out when it comes to NIL, and maybe he does. But I am so glad you don't hear the Georgia coach, speaking for a moment as a UGA fan, I am so glad you don't hear the Georgia coach saying, I don't have responsibility for putting players in this roster. That responsibility rests with the boosters. That is not what I would want the head coach, a guy making millions of dollars, by the way, to say. That attempt to sidestep responsibility, I just think is very presidential on the part of Kiffin, and maybe you'd expect nothing less from him. I played some audio of Eli Drinkwitz a little earlier. In the room I was in with the Missouri coach, something else kind of interesting happened, which is 15 minutes worth of questions. At the end of the time, Drinkwitz, as he was getting up, says, wow, nobody asked me about which scheduling model I would prefer, meaning the 8-game conference schedule with one permanent opponent, or the 9-game conference schedule with 3 permanent opponents. Drinkwitz was like, wow, nobody asked me about that. I guess we'll have to save that for a different time. It almost seems like that's a question that he wished he would have gotten. And what I thought was kind of interesting is later on, because there's a lot of stuff in SEC media that sort of happens at the same time. It's kind of hard to follow it all. When Drinkwitz was meeting with his own reporters, he sort of did the same kind of thing, and I forget what the topic was even about, but at the very end of it, he kind of pulled the same deal where it was about regional rivalries and wanting to play Oklahoma and Texas and teams like that more. And he was like, yeah, nobody asked me about this, blah, blah, blah. I guess we'll have to do this some other time. It almost seemed like Drinkwitz went into some of his press conference stuff with an agenda yesterday, hoping to get a chance to talk about certain issues, and didn't really get a chance to talk about them. I sort of gather that he thinks it will be good for his program if they are playing the westernmost SEC teams a little more frequently, whether that be teams in Texas, that's a place that Missouri wants to recruit, or a regional rival like Arkansas. You seem to get the impression that Missouri thinks it's better for it. I mean, this is totally me reading between the lines here, but you sort of get the impression that Drinkwitz might think it's better for his future to be playing more of their games west of the Gateway Arch as opposed to east of the Gateway Arch. I sort of got that impression from Eli Drinkwitz yesterday based on some of the questions that he was hoping he would get that maybe he kind of didn't. Day 2 is today for SEC Media Days. Talked to Connor a moment ago about Alabama, their presence, their arrival. Now you see Shane Beamer. Look at Beamer strutting in, getting – South Carolina is usually pretty good with video stuff. They have a good video staff. And Beamer kind of plays into this pretty well. I like Shane Beamer. I think he's good. I think he's fun. I think he has fun with himself, does not take himself too seriously. One of the most laid-back, normal acting coaches in the SEC. A lot of these guys just have a hard time acting normal. Beamer seems to do that pretty well, and this is obviously a pretty well-done video kind of previewing his arrival at SEC Media Days. That's pretty good stuff from a underrated video staff there at South Carolina. I'm curious to find out, and I hope to get a chance to ask maybe Shane Beamer about this later on today, about how South Carolina feels about wanting to play Georgia each and every year moving forward. If the SEC does eventually move to a 9-game conference schedule, how badly do the Gamecocks want to see the Dogs every year? Maybe we'll ask Beamer about that. Also, obviously, he was very outspoken about Georgia a year ago. I'm sure that may come up again here today there as well. So good stuff with Beamer on that. Clark Lee from Vanderbilt's there, although I doubt anyone will notice. Mike Leach from Mississippi State is there today, as well as some of his Bulldogs players. This is one of those games that for Georgia this season, Georgia, as you know, goes to Starkville in November. It's been described as a potential trap game for UGA. Is Georgia already on Mike Leach's mind? Maybe we'll get a chance to ask him that at some point in time today. And as we said before, the Alabama Crimson Tide are ongoing there as well. So a lot going down there when it comes to all of that. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Also want to give you in a moment here some of what I thought was a very interesting answer from Greg Sankey yesterday as it relates to a concern that I think a lot of fans have about the way in which the SEC is changing so fast and the aggressive way in which the SEC seems willing to kind of pursue some of those changes. We'll ask Greg Sankey about that here coming up in just a moment, let you hear the answer that he gave on that. Also want to tell you about a big weekend coming up for the Atlanta Braves, too. This is something that's got to be on your radar on the other side of the Major League Baseball All-Star break. Of course, the All-Star game is tonight. On the other side of that, though, the Braves have a huge homestand coming up as the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim are on their way to Truist Park, and I live with a very big Braves fan, my 10-year-old son. You better believe he's already talking about this. I believe there's a really good chance that Shohei Ohtani may actually pitch on Friday night, I believe. But you got Ohtani, you got Mike Trout, you got one of the most star-studded teams in Major League Baseball, the Angels coming into town, and also all-stars like Austin Riley and Ronald Acuna Jr. They're going to be on hand there for that there as well. It's a huge weekend of big stars there at Truist Park. Plus, you got the CMT Hot Prospects concert going on with Brian Kelly there as well. So some fun live music taking place, Friday night fireworks, as you always have. And you got Kids Day coming up there as well. This is going to be on Sunday, July 24th. Super fun when it comes to Kids Day. You got a pregame parade. Get a chance to go around the field there on that. You get to make your own sign. They have the sign-making table. You got some the games there in Hope and Will Sandlot. That's like the carnival-style game where you like sort of throw the strikes, you pitch the ball, get a chance to hit in the batting cage, things like that. Those are going to be free there that day. Plus, the first 3,000 kids in the ballpark are going to receive a free blooper squishmallow there as well. So, Kids Day is coming up on July 24th. Angels coming into town, bringing Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout there with them. It's going to be one of the biggest weekends for the Atlanta Braves on the other side of the All-Star break, with the Angels coming in and then the Kids Day there on Sunday, July 24th. So make sure you check that out. A huge weekend there at Truist Park coming up very soon. Braves.com/promos for more information on that. Braves.com/promos for more information on that. All right, yesterday at SEC Media Days, Commissioner Greg Sankey kind of took center stage related to all the change that is happening around college football and the role the SEC is playing in that, and the SEC kind of at the center of much of that. But when I talked to Greg Sankey yesterday, I didn't really get into conference expansion and some of the other stuff that's happening in other places. I'm talking about the conference expansion happening right here in the SEC and the way in which future SEC schedules are going to look quite a bit different than they have in the past. And I've heard from many of you, you're not sure you like all of that, and you're not quite so sure you're going to see change for the better when it comes to the SEC on this. So this is what Greg Sankey would say back to you on that. Here's the commissioner from yesterday. You know, the SEC is going to undergo a lot of changes in future years. Going to add 2 more members. Schedule's going to change. Some rivalries may be done away with. What do you say to fans that are concerned that it might be changing in such a way that it makes the sport or the league they've loved kind of unrecognizable, or at least very, very different looking in future years?
I don't think that's our reality at all. I think we'll be fully recognizable. And in fact, the question about who we add and how we think about who we add, one of our athletics directors said they meet the "it just means more" test, and their fan base is committed. They play at a high level. People understand the importance of competing and being victorious, or if you lose, how you adjust. That will happen across our 16 members, I think, in every sport. Rivalries won't go away in our new scheduling model.
So he says rivalries won't go away in our new scheduling model, and mentions the excitement that he has about bringing in Texas and Oklahoma, and the fact that they, as he says, sort of meet the standard of "it just means more." And I don't think there's any doubt about that. You know, Oklahoma plays a big-time brand of football. They've been in the college football playoff several times, and then go back to like the history of the program, Barry Switzer, Bud Wilkinson. This is as big a college football program as kind of exists anywhere. This is clearly a big-time ad for the SEC to bring in the Sooners. You know, Texas, for all the the talk that exists around how overrated they've been for quite some time, this is still a big-time program. It's certainly a very big following. There's no doubt that the SEC is a much bigger entity by having Texas and Oklahoma in it. But I just haven't heard from very many folks who are that excited about this. You know, the notion of, oh, the SEC is bigger. But the average fan that I hear from on a regular basis, I haven't really heard that much in the way of bigger meaning it's better. You know, the SEC better because it adds the Sooners and the Longhorns. The fact of the matter is, Greg Sankey, because he sees what this is going to mean for the overall bottom line of the league, he's just frankly, I believe, a lot more excited about the addition of Texas and Oklahoma than the average SEC fan is. And then as far as what he says about the rivalries not going away and the opportunity for a lot of these rivalry games to still be played, he went into more detail with me about exactly what he means by that. Here's more of the commissioner on that topic.
Rivalries may be played on a different pace. So some rivalries that have been played less frequently because people happen to be in different divisions may play more frequently. Rivalry games that may be annually may be every other year. So the rivalries won't go away. The rivalries will be front and center. A lot of that, whether it's annual or every other year, will depend on which model we pick. The ability to protect more annual rivalry games is there in a 3-team kind of 9-game model. So that's front and center, but we need to think through the implications of that model. So I would say to our fans, we're going to look exactly the same. Maybe it'll be a little bit different uniform. You're going to see some of the uniforms but you don't see but once a decade more frequently in football. And we'll continue to rotate people through on a regular basis so you can engage in the emotional outbursts, good or bad, in every sport we have.
I really think the SEC needs that 9-game model. The more I think about it, the more I ponder on it. I think you need those 3 permanent opponents. I think you need something about the SEC that continues to feel like the SEC. There's a degree to which if Georgia's not playing Auburn each and every year, this league just would not quite feel like what it once felt like. It'd still be big-time college football. It'd be probably the biggest version of big-time college football, but it wouldn't quite be the SEC anymore. And, you know, the defense that I think Sankey has offered about that a lot recently is, yeah, well, all of our states are contiguous. The word contiguous got used a lot by Sankey yesterday, meaning they touch each other. You know, this idea of it used to be the SEC, it just means more. Now the rallying cry seems to be all of our states touch each other, as if somehow that's way better than the situation of the Big Ten, where you've got the far West Coast with the LA schools and the far East Coast with Rutgers. Like, is Georgia supposed to feel some sort of common kinship with Oklahoma because the University of Oklahoma is in a state that touches a state, that touches a state, that touches a state, that touches a state, that also touches Georgia? Like, is that supposed to be somehow that makes Oklahoma a cousin to UGA, some sort of kinship there on that? The same thing for Austin. I mean, you know how far away Austin, Texas is from where I'm sitting right now? somehow Georgia fans in the state of Georgia feeling kind of like brotherhood with the University of Texas. I don't think that's the case at all. Now, it doesn't mean that it eventually won't feel like the SEC, but I think the concern that some fans have with the aggressive way in which the SEC is approaching all of this is certainly making the kinds of changes that the average fan is just not quite sure is a change for the better. But I don't think Greg Sankey shows any signs of wanting to slow down anytime soon. Now, I don't believe they're all that interested in taking more expansion teams in the league right now, because I don't truly believe there are any teams left for them to take, at least right now at the moment, with the ACC grant of rights contract being what it is, and Notre Dame for the moment seemingly holding out with the hope of maybe remaining an independent. I don't believe there's any team for the SEC to currently poach. But there's no doubt, putting that aside, that Greg Sankey right now views his role in the college landscape more as someone to compete with and compete against the other entities, as opposed to any kind of form of cooperation whatsoever. There is no more cooperation left. This is now a survival of the fittest race to be the biggest and the best. And if it comes at the expense of destroying the other leagues, I don't think that Greg Sankey would slow down to do that. It's one of the reasons why, as weird as it might sound, I kind of find myself rooting for Notre Dame here a little bit, and that's an odd place for me to be, because typically speaking, I wouldn't root for the Fighting Irish in anything. I guess I did root for them this summer when they were playing Tennessee in the college baseball, but typically speaking, don't root for the Irish very much. And yet, I sort of find myself rooting for the Irish to remain an independent, get the money they feel like they need from NBC to be able to do that, because maybe that might be enough to kind of hold all this together. That might be enough to keep the Big 12 from absorbing any more Pac-12 teams, or the Pac-12 could sort of coalesce around their two big fish, Oregon and Washington. That might keep them as a league, and maybe the ACC, just for the lack of having anywhere else to go, maybe they might kind of hold together there a little bit. There's a part of me that somehow, some way, wants to still figure out a way for college football to kind of feel like college football. If the SEC got its way, I'm not quite so sure that's what would happen. So it's a story worth following, and Greg Sankey certainly had plenty to say about it yesterday. Of course, I mentioned off the top of the show, Year of the Dog last night on the SEC Network. Thought it was terrific, and at least one of y'all found himself in the show. Davis Mulvane shared this with me. He said, my Orange Bowl emotion got some screen time. So how about that for Davis right there on screen, celebrating in Miami with all of that? That's a great thing to be able to see. Good stuff from Davis on that. I believe we have another one to share there as well. Some of the Alabama fans showing up. You've got Pat Forty on Twitter saying, break it to them gently, Keely Ringo still hasn't been tackled. Very funny to see an Alabama fan showing off that national championship ring, the hat there. But unfortunately, that ring is with the Georgia Bulldogs here right now. Jay Busby on Twitter having some fun with that too. So Bama fans showing up, doing what they do, but dogs on top right now in college football. Never let them forget that. Lousy, stinking Gators, much the same way. 4,940 days since they have won a national championship. Tough to be a Gator. How about Gator Hater Countdown? 102 days from right now. Dogs back in Jacksonville, beating Florida again. Billy Napier will be at SEC Media Days tomorrow. Don't you know he knows what he's in store for? We'll see tomorrow as well. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. All right, y'all, got to be very quick on comments because we've got a lot going on. You see Shane Beamer walking in there as well, doing a little pregame video, hyping himself up. I like Beamer. I think that he's one of those guys that, I don't know, he sort of gives off a good vibe. I just think that he's a casual guy, doesn't take himself too seriously, easy to talk to. There are a lot of SEC coaches that, frankly, aren't all that easy to talk to. But I think that Shane Beamer is certainly one of those. And I think it worked. I think it serves him well. To the extent that his interests don't, intersect with Georgia's, I kind of wish Shane Beamer well in South Carolina. I do. So let's take a few comments here very quickly, and then we'll get ready to to kind of move on with the rest of our very busy day. Hemingway says on DawgNation.com that Notre Dame should never be in the SEC, maybe Clemson or Florida State if it comes to that. Yeah, I think that you have to think about cultural fit, and I don't believe that Notre Dame is a cultural fit for the SEC. I also think that Notre Dame just wants to stay independent if they can. But when you look at the huge payouts coming the way of like these teams in the SEC and the Big Ten, that's far more than what Notre Dame has gotten in its most recent TV deal, media rights deal. Dennis Dodd reporting at CBS yesterday that the Irish seeking $75 million per year when they renegotiate a new contract in 2025, and if they can do that, they will stay independent. As I said before, a lot of people don't like Notre Dame. A lot of people think they should have to join a conference. I understand where you're coming from on that in terms of, they've clearly, sort of roller skated their way into the playoff a couple of times as an undeserving team. But sometimes you've heard this phrase before that politics makes strange bedfellows. I think in some cases the politics of conference expansion can kind of make strange bedfellows too. I find myself sort of rooting for the Irish to get what they want because I believe if they could stay independent, they might have the ability to hold this whole thing together. And maybe I'm misreading that. There is a lot that's happening with all of this. I don't mind telling you. I'm not quite so sure I'm smart enough to process all of this in terms of who it benefits and, how it impacts this over here. The kind of, butterfly effect of all this can be a little tricky at times. But I sort of get the sense that Notre Dame remaining an independent might be good for those of us who don't want college football to be just kind of a watered-down version of the NFL. Because, right now, college football is the second most popular sport in America. There's no doubt that it is. And it's nowhere near as popular as the NFL. But one of the things that benefits college football is not being the NFL. People like college football because it's different. It's sort of a weird style of play in some places. You have a lot of weird traditions in other places. You tune in these college football games, and the entire look of the experience is just clearly different. The quality of play is lesser than the NFL. No one would dispute that. But the experience for most of us who are a part of this conversation right now is actually more enjoyable. What makes college football different than the NFL makes it as popular as it is. And I do truly believe that a lot of this sort of chasing of professionalism by the players, by the coaches, by the administrators, by everybody, I think runs the risk of harming college football in comparison to what it's most often going to be compared to, the big behemoth that is the NFL. If you look simply nothing more like a lesser version of the NFL, at that point in time, you're the USFL or the XFL or any of these other things that fail all the time. Jay Shipe says 24 hours since a YouTube start. How spun out will you be with Facebook down? Is Facebook down right now? Is that the case? I haven't even been over to Facebook to see. Well, I was going to go to YouTube, but now that Jay said this, I've got to check Facebook. Are we not on Facebook? All right, let's see. Is Jay giving me propaganda? Let's see. No, we're on Facebook. Have we been on the whole time? Well, this is propaganda. Jay's not a Facebook guy. I'm pretty sure Jay's been kicked off Facebook. I seriously doubt he's allowed on Facebook anymore for any number of reasons. Ken Holcomb says, you missed a Game of Thrones marathon chat. Never watched or played myself, so I have no idea what they were conversing about. Is it a game, a TV show, or a series or movies? They were talking about that on the Facebook comment section. Yeah, so I watched most of the Game of Thrones seasons, series that aired on HBO. Never got to all the way to the end. I heard it wasn't very good, the conclusion, so I didn't watch the rest of it. Ken also saying that Facebook is up and has been, so you can add this to the list of things that Jay Shipes has been wrong about. Hugh Nash says we're full over here. There you go. Rick Wallace says, do you think the realignment will make for better home games? There's a very good chance that it does because, let's face it, it'd be hard for them to get much worse than they have been. I understand that. I'm even sympathetic to the idea that I like the cocktail party. I like the game being in Jacksonville, but the one argument against that game being in Jacksonville against Florida that probably resonates with me the most is the fact that Georgia just needs more access to better home games. I think that's a fair argument, and I am totally willing to listen to Georgia fans who want to make that case. And I think the point you're bringing up is also a good one there too. that when it comes to change, there are plenty of things sometimes about change that are changes for the worse. There are oftentimes things that end up being changes for the better, and this could be an example of a potential change for the better if Georgia does get better home games out of a expanded SEC and sort of a expanded SEC conference schedule. That could be an example of that, for sure. Suzanne Mize checking in. Suzanne, great to see you today. Glad that you are here and hope you're having a great day. We appreciate you being a part of our conversation today, and hope you're having a good time. Sandy Price says messing with the rivalry game is going to make a lot of fans upset. I think it will. Look, I think you got to keep some history and tradition in place. And it is a really tricky thing about how you do both. Like, I take my kids to Disney World sometimes. I think Disney World's kind of fascinating in this respect, in that, Disney's always like adding new things, and adding new things means getting rid of some old things. So Disney's kind of changing a good bit. And some of you like Disney, some of you don't. I get that. I'm just using it to make a point. And as much as you see like some old things done away with so they can bring on some new rides and some new movies and kind of bring in some stuff that sort of resonates with very young people, there's some things, it's Small World, Peter Pan, things like that never change. And I don't believe they ever will change. And Disney, as well as any organization when it comes to theme parks, and even the content on like Disney Plus too, is a little bit like this. They seem to have a pretty good idea of, hey, we got to have twin pillars here. We got to have the pillar of like history and heritage and prestige and legacy. We got to have that on the one side. And we've got to be constantly inventing new stuff there as well, so we can reach younger audiences that don't have a built-in connection to the other thing. And if you want to be the biggest entity in the world, you got to have both. And Disney sort of seems to understand that. On a smaller scale, I think the SEC would do right to understand that there too. That adding Texas and Oklahoma is good for business, and therefore you should probably do it, because if you're not growing, you're probably getting smaller, and you don't really want to do that. But conversely, if in the midst of like trying to get bigger as a business, you make too many changes, well, all of a sudden then you don't quite have the same connection to the legacy that you've established, and that has the potential of hurting you over the course of the long haul. So trying to find a way to do both, to be, big on the one side and kind of small on the other, or should not say big on the one side, long lasting, never changing with certain aspects of your brand image, and kind of fresh and new and willing to reinvent on the other. Trying to find a way to do both is pretty important. All right, couple of other comments here as well. Philip Jordan Wells says Nakobe Dean was our champion by combat trial competitor. If you had to pick one for UGA, certainly you could do worse than picking Nakobe, because you got to have like the sort of the combination of speed and strength, somebody that can sort of do a lot of different kind of things. So yeah, there you go on that. Miriam Corbin says she did not get a notification today. Facebook and these notifications, man. That's what it was the lack of Facebook notifications that actually got us to start the show at DawgNation.com. We essentially built our own platform because of the fact that Facebook is just so unreliable. So now, as it turns out, starting the show at DawgNation.com has been one of the best things we've ever done. But had Facebook not became what it became, which is just not sending out notifications, I'm not quite sure we would have ever even done that. Let's see what else. Jay Shipe says the show starts at 10. Why do you need notifications? Now, I do sort of agree with Jay on that, and look, I realized that, at one point in time, we were just bad about starting at like whatever time. Like these days on the regular video platforms, we're on the air like right at 10 every single day. So on this particular point, I sort of have to back up Jay Shipes on this. I feel like he's bringing a pretty good point up, is that you can count on us being here. In fact, we even pre-record shows on these like vacation days now. Like we're here every dadgum day. At least for the most part we are. We may not be here Thanksgiving Day and Christmas Day, but we're basically here every day other than that. So it would certainly thrill me if people would not rely on the notification. But people also get into the habits they're getting into. But on this point, Jay's actually right. Even a broken clock's right twice a day. And on this point, Jay's actually right that you don't need the notifications when the show always starts at 10. I kind of agree with that. Guatemala Mike says, I used to be late all the time. I mean, it's one of the biggest improvements probably year over year that you can see. You know, before we started the 1st and 15, we were late all the time. And look, no one's good at everything. And I don't know that I'm good at anything, but the one thing I'm not good at, I'm just not very organized, right? It's like the kind of person who would, you know, do the kind of work that I do, oftentimes not a very organized person, and I'm kind of that way too. I'm just kind of always just sort of like one step ahead. Like, actually not one step ahead. What I mean is, like, I'm sort of just always just kind of like scrambling to get ready for everything. It's just kind of the story of my life. And that kind of results sometimes in just, you know, kind of running a little bit late here and there. And so we had a tendency to start the show at 10:15, stuff like that. When we started doing the 1st and 15, I think we shocked the world in the fact that every now and then I'm like 5 minutes late to start the 1st and 15, but we used to be 15 minutes late to start the show. So, like, even being 5 minutes late is way better than we used to be. Now, we need to be starting exactly on time every single day. I get that. But the sort of year-over-year improvement that we've shown, by the way, even 1st and 15 now, we're pretty close to always starting on time. Like, we've done so much better with that. Antoine Simpson says, I don't want a notification, but YouTube doesn't show up at 7 a.m. for me to log on every day. That's interesting. I don't know what that's about. Let's see what else. Let's go on the subject of Tennille being here. Is Tennille still in the Peach State, or did she go back out to California? Chase White on the subject of UGA and the off-season's worth of recruiting. Yeah, I think it's still a work in progress. I mean, you know, there have been a couple of losses that I certainly wish that Georgia wouldn't have sustained. I don't mind telling you that. There have been a couple of those. But also, I think there's, you know, a chance that that Georgia's still in business for a couple of pretty big time players. This stands to be a pretty good week for UGA. The two defensive names, you know, you got Kelton Smith who's coming up there as well. So so there you go. Andrew Hughes says, if we win the national championship again, we want to see you do 50 push-ups. You think that feels like you're saying you don't think I can do 50 push-ups. Now, depending on what you define as a push-up, I feel like I could probably do 50, maybe. If it's one of those things where I've got to go, like, you know, nose to the ground, I don't know if I'm quite getting all the way down, but I'm in better shape than that. Than that. Guatemala Mike asked what happened to Marlon Dean. I honestly don't know, other than the fact that he's not believed to be on the UGA roster anymore. You know, some guys just decide their path towards playing time is better somewhere else, and that to me is what the transfer portal is supposed to be for. And so if that's what he's doing, I kind of wish him well in that regard. Jay Shipe says the greatest prediction last offseason was A&M will go from 4th in the country to 4th in the SEC West. I'm undefeated. That is a prediction that did come true. And by the way, another example of Jay Shipe's commenting about Texas A&M. I said this yesterday. I hope y'all are getting hip to this. Jay gives me a hard time all the time for talking about Texas A&M. I don't believe I mentioned A&M on the entire show today. I don't believe I used the word Texas A&M not one time. And Jay's still in here commenting on A&M. So I hope you noticed that. I just hope you noticed that. Foster Moss says pretty much today is Alabama Media Day, isn't it, BA? Yeah, it's actually really amazing to be in SEC Media Days when Alabama shows up, especially in Hoover. And I'm guessing to a degree in Alabama, I should say in Atlanta there as well, because there's obviously a bunch of, you know, Bama folks crawling around here too. But there's definitely a buzz when Bama's present. And, you know, I mean, you know, there's a lot of Alabama media, Alabama-centric media. There's just a big following, you know, around the Crimson Tide. You know, for as big as the SEC is, even Georgia in some respects, nothing quite feels the same way as Alabama arriving in SEC Media Days does, Nick Saban in particular. It's just a different kind of thing. It is. It's almost like it's almost like sort of a presidential motorcade type feel to it. I mean, there's just a different type of thing here today. Cineo says I'm giving Jay a hard time. I'm just messing with him. Jerry Dog fan asked, does Monken recruit any players? I don't think anybody would say that recruiting is Todd Monken's strong suit. I don't believe anybody would say that. I don't consider him to be kind of a lead guy type recruiter. A lot of offensive coordinators kind of aren't. I also thought one of the things we've heard about Monken a lot is he's demanding as a coach. Boy, that video on the SEC Network last night gave a lot of life to that. Man, he was riding at one point in time Stetson Bennett, like, make a decision, just yelling at him. That was really interesting and, not unexpected. This is where the, practice goes. But we've heard it described that Todd Monken's a very demanding coach, and the short snippets of him we got last night, certainly an example of that. Let's see what else. All right, final comments. We got to go here. Let's see what else. Daniel Rivera says Texas needs to beat Kansas before they can say they're back. I would agree with that. Jay Shipe says I've traded being an A&M homer for being a Lane Kiffin hater. I just don't like some of the stuff that Kiffin says. I mean, Kiffin's clearly an interesting guy, but I can't have you blaming everything on everybody but you. I just can't have you doing that. Joseph Kennedy says, why do their SEC network analysts have Spencer Rattler rated so high? I think that Spencer Rattler probably is a pretty good quarterback. I mean, I think what's weird is that, I think people have this assumption that Caleb Williams is way better than he is because Williams was the quarterback that was inserted when Rattler got benched. But the truth is, by the end of last season, there were plenty of Oklahoma fans that sort of wish they'd go back to Spencer Rattler. The weird thing that nobody seems to really be aware of is that down the stretch last year, Caleb Williams just wasn't playing very well. And no one seems to know that, or at least seems to remember that. And in light of that, I mean, I've said before that I think there's a chance that Spencer Rattler actually has a better season than Caleb Williams does. Now, I think the issue is there's a lot more than just quarterback going on for any football team. And even having a good quarterback, while it makes South Carolina a very dangerous opponent to play on a given basis, it doesn't necessarily change the outlook for the team maybe as much as sometimes folks kind of assume during this portion of the offseason. So, I mean, I'm not going to say that Spencer Rattler isn't a good quarterback. I think he probably is. Now, is he overhyped? I don't know that I necessarily feel that way. Maybe there's been a lot of talk today because he's actually at SEC Media Days, but I'd be curious to find out if other folks think that he's been over-discussed related to like what his arrival to the SEC kind of means. Somebody said something about me shaving my head. Listen, the hair I've got left, I am holding on to as if it was my 401k. I ain't shaving it. I'm not cutting it too short. I'm afraid it won't grow back. I'm just not doing that. Let's see what else. Miriam Corbin on the subject of what Spencer Rattler's personality is like. That's a different topic, and certainly people have had their say about that for sure. Let's see what else. Anything else before we go? Yeah, Alan Rabanchik talking about me shaving my head. That's not going to happen. I got to hold on to this little bit of hair that I do have. Keith Volt says, win another national championship instead of doing push-ups, I want to see doing some backflips. Listen, in spirit, I'd certainly want to. But I don't know that the old body would be willing on that. Dwayne Killing's also on the subject of the Year of the Dog. I thought it was great. I really did. I thought it was really good. And part of what made it good is the fact you just don't get that kind of thing around college football nearly as much as you get that to the NFL. Cam Hasty, want to give a shout-out to my fellow commenter and my office mate, Jacob Yarborough, on the birth of his beautiful baby girl. Please pass along to Jacob our happiness about that. That's super great news to hear. Also, I didn't know that you and Jacob knew each other. It's kind of neat to find out commenters actually know each other, like, away from the comment section. That's kind of cool. I didn't realize that. BA's listening face says, I'm going to have the opinion that the show doesn't really start until I get here. There you go. BA's listening face really making a few appearances at SEC Media Days there today, too, probably, unfortunately. He also says, we were actually early in starting today. I just happened to see it and thought something must be wrong if BA was early with the show. Well, there you go. Keith Finney says, 8 days until cruise time. I got checked in on the 14th. We're ready to go. Boy, I hope you have a great time, Cam. That's awesome to hear. Awesome to hear. Hemingway, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. That's super nice to hear. Joe Garliotti says, I feel like the people pushing these changes are like spectators at a gladiator fight. They just enjoy the chaos and want to watch someone die. I know I can kind of feel that way. One more thing that Eli Drinkwitz said yesterday that was kind of interesting is something to the effect of, everybody says they don't want college football to become a professional sport, but no one's putting any guardrails to prevent that. And he basically said, okay, if that's not what we want, then what is anybody doing to stop it? I think it's a really fair question. A really fair question. All right, final comments here on YouTube, and then we're gone. Let's Go Brandon checking out. Good to have you here. Fred McMillan taking a jab there at Lane Kiffin. Andrew Hughes says, do you think we have a 1,000-yard rusher this season? I think Georgia needs to. I do. I told this to Connor earlier, and I will say yes, it does. I think Georgia just needs to be better running football. That for a Georgia team that averaged 38, 39 points a game a year ago, to get up to like, say, 42 points per game this year, a reasonable level of growth year over year, to me, it's not the passing game that necessarily needs to improve, because I didn't think that Georgia was actually that bad throwing the football a year ago. Probably way better than they've been at any point in time under Kirby Smart. I think the real area in which Georgia can improve is by running the ball. Now, that doesn't mean I want Georgia to become a run-first team and, rush it 50 times a game. That's not what I'm saying. But when you do run the ball, get more out of it. Create more explosive runs. Turn a 4 or 5 yard gain into a 10, 15 yard gain. And that's on the running back to do that. The smart sort of math-oriented football fans will tell you that on a running play, those first 5 yards, that really belongs to the offensive line. That would make sense to us. How big can you open up the hole? Can you create the space necessary for a 4 or 5 yard gain to take place? You credit the offensive line for that. But beyond that, does a 5 yard run become a 10 yard run? Well, that's the running back taking an open hole, making that first linebacker miss, getting more yards than that. That's on the running back. And, Georgia, when it comes to like sort of the 4 or 5 yard runs, actually still does really pretty well. But turning a 4 yard run into a 9 yard run, Georgia could be better at that. And that's going to be on running backs to make guys miss. And that's what Kendall Milton, Kenny McIntosh, Dejon Edwards, Branson Robinson, Andrew Paul, that's what they're going to have a chance to do this upcoming season. By the way, I mentioned Andrew Paul right there because somebody earlier criticized me saying I don't mention him enough, and that could be a fair criticism. But that's one of the things I think is at stake for Georgia here in this upcoming year. So that is that. We'll leave it there for today and see you back here tomorrow. I'll be at SEC Media Days, hopefully able to bring you more sights and sounds from that. I won't be there, though, when Alabama's there. They'll be gone by the time I get there, which is pretty much the way I would prefer it. But in terms of any personal interactions with me and the Bama folks, that's not going to happen. But maybe some stuff with Shane Beamer. Maybe, if I'm lucky, a little bit of Mike Leach. I might get some of that and hope to give you that on the show here tomorrow. I'll also completely miss the Georgia stuff. It's one of those things where I almost called in sick on the show just so I could go to Georgia Media Day. I just don't need to do that. This is my job. We got people covering the event. My job is to do the show. So I'm going to be here and just do the show on Wednesday. But I would like to be there in person for Georgia for SEC Media Days, but I will miss that so I can be here. And plus, I almost just did the show live from Atlanta, but that doesn't do me any good either because I'm still not in the room where the Georgia folks are having their conversation. So much of that taking place while we're doing the show. So tomorrow is UGA Day at SEC Media Days. It'll be happening while we're doing the show. We'll just watch it all together. How does that sound? We'll just kind of do a lot of that kind of stuff as we're doing our thing. So that's going to go down there. Y'all make sure to check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC.com. AJC got plenty of coverage of SEC Media Days there. Also, Major League Baseball All-Star Game tonight from Dodger Stadium. You can get plenty of that from the AJC there, too. Lots of stuff going on. Of course, Major League Baseball Draft, get an update kind of on some of that kind of stuff. So a bunch of stuff going down there when it comes to the AJC. So make sure you check that out. And how about $257 million worth of donations to the University of Georgia? That's kind of an interesting thing there, too. So see all that. See who the Braves drafted. Check out our buddy D. Orlando Ledbetter looking at the Atlanta Falcons roster, where that stands, moving in NFL training camp, which is on the way sooner than you probably think. So all of that's going to go down there. Also, our friends at RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Get your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. RS Andrews can do it for you. Find them online, rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow. Back here for DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, our RS Andrews cool down once that's done. We'll talk to you then, everybody.